I watched my husband disappear through airport security, giving me one last wave before the crowd swallowed him. Just 40 minutes later, our housekeeper called, crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Emily, don't come home," she whispered. I thought the house was on fire, but when I opened the security camera on my phone, I saw something even worse. My in-laws were standing over the open safe in my husband's office, pulling out passports and important documents like they owned the place. Then, impossibly, the front door opened. And Ryan walked in, still wearing the exact same suit he'd left for the airport in. Dallas Love Field was already buzzing at 7:00 a.m., the kind of organized chaos I'd seen countless times over our 20 years of marriage. Ryan pulled his black carry-on behind him, the same scuffed one he always used for short trips, and kissed me at the drop-off curb the way he always did. Quick familiar his hand briefly at the small of my back. "See you Sunday," he said, and smiled in that easy way that had disarmed me the first time I met him and never really stopped. "Call me when you land," I told him, and he nodded already, turning toward the terminal doors. I stood there longer than I needed to, watching him wheel that suitcase through the sliding glass doors, watching him disappear into the security line. Watching until I genuinely couldn't pick him out from the crowd anymore. 3 days in Denver for his firm's regional conference, nothing about that morning felt unusual. If anything, it felt like every other business trip he'd taken in the past 2 decades routine to the point of being forgettable. I drove home with the radio on thinking about a client meeting I had that afternoon, a kitchen renovation for a family in Highland Park that was 3 weeks behind schedule. I was maybe 10 minutes from the house when my phone rang. Sophia Alvarez had worked for us 13 years. She'd started when our house still smelled like fresh paint and unopened boxes, and she'd stayed through every renovation, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday since. I answered without much thought, expecting some small logistical question about the cleaning schedule. Instead, I heard her crying. "Emily," she said, her voice breaking on my name. "Emily, don't go home." My stomach dropped in that instant sudden way it does when your body understands something is wrong before your mind catches up. "Sophia, what happened? Is something on fire? Did someone break in? Just please open the camera, open the app. I don't know how to explain it." I pulled into a gas station parking lot on Mockingbird Lane, my hands not quite steady as I opened the security app on my phone. The feed from the office camera loaded slowly, and for a moment, I just stared at a grainy, static image before it resolved into something I understood. Deanne, my mother-in-law, 71 years old, always so particular about her appearance, standing in Ryan's home office in a blouse I recognized from Easter dinner. Beside her, Thomas, my father-in-law, a quiet man who rarely said more than a dozen words at any family gathering. And a third person, a woman I had never seen in my life, maybe in her late 30s, dark-haired, moving with the kind of familiarity that suggested this wasn't her first time in that room. They were standing over the safe. Our safe bolted into the floor of the closet behind Ryan's desk, the one that held our passports, the deed to the house insurance documents, things we rarely touched except once a year for tax season. It was open. Diane was handing folders to the woman I didn't recognize. Thomas was holding what looked like our passports, flipping through them like he was checking something specific. I sat in that parking lot with the engine running and felt something in my chest go strangely quiet the way a room goes quiet right before a storm. "Sophia," I said carefully, "who is that woman?" "I don't know her name," Sophia whispered. "I've never seen her before either. I was in the laundry room when I heard them come in. I didn't know what to do. I called you first." I watched the screen, waiting for some explanation to present itself. Some innocent reason my in-laws would be going through our safe with a stranger while my husband was 30,000 FT in the air. None came. What came instead a few seconds later was the sound of the doorbell through my phone speaker, tiny and distant, and I watched the woman on screen turn and hurry toward the front hallway to answer it. The door opened and Ryan walked in. He was still wearing the same navy suit he had worn to the airport that morning, still pulling the black carry-on behind him, its wheels catching slightly on the threshold the way they always did. He walked into our house and straight into the office as if he belonged there, as if nothing was unusual. I stared at the screen for so long that the gas station attendant knocked on my window and asked if I needed anything. I couldn't answer. My mind was trying to make sense of two things that simply couldn't both be true. a husband supposedly on a flight to Denver, and that same husband standing in our office only 40 minutes after I had watched him disappear through airport security. That's impossible, I whispered to myself. He's supposed to be on a plane right now. I didn't drive home. In fact, I didn't drive anywhere. I just sat in the gas station parking lot with the engine running, watching my own house through a 4-inch screen as if it belonged to someone else. My first instinct was to call Ryan and demand an explanation. I wanted to hear him lie to me in real time, to catch the exact moment his voice changed. I already had his number open when I remembered Linda Morrison's business card tucked inside my wallet from a fundraiser luncheon 8 months earlier. I called her instead. "Don't call anyone," Linda said after I explained what I was seeing in broken, disbelieving sentences. "Not him, not his parents, not anyone in that house. Right now you have the advantage. The moment you make a call, you lose it. He's supposed to be in Denver," I kept repeating. "I watched him go through security. People cancel flights after security all the time," Linda replied calmly, as though she had guided other women through mornings exactly like this. "Just keep watching, don't do anything yet." So I watched. Ryan set his suitcase down in the office and unzipped it without any sign of urgency. The woman, still a stranger to me at that point, walked over and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't the awkward embrace of something new, it was easy, familiar, practiced. Standing beside the open safe, Diane smiled and said something I couldn't hear clearly through the camera's weak audio, but 3 words came through perfectly. 3 days is enough, the words settled heavily in my stomach. 3 days, the exact length of the business trip Ryan had told me about, not a coincidence, a plan. Ryan opened the suitcase and began taking things out. What I saw only deepened my confusion because there were no clothes inside. No shirts, no toiletries, none of the things you'd expect from someone heading to a conference. Instead, he pulled out thick folders secured with rubber bands, a small metal box that looked like it contained spare keys, a USB drive sealed in a clear plastic case, and stacks of official-looking documents. The suitcase had never been packed for a trip. "He's using the conference as an excuse," I said quietly as the truth started fitting together piece by piece. "This was never about work," Ryan spoke then, clearly enough for the microphone to catch. "She won't be back before Sunday," Diane answered almost immediately. "Then we have plenty of time." A chill ran through me. An affair was one thing, painful, devastating, but something I could eventually process. This felt different. It felt organized, planned. Built around dates, fake travel arrangements, and a suitcase packed specifically to deceive me, and I was only 40 minutes into discovering it. My phone buzzed again. Sophia. This time her voice was softer, more cautious. "Emily, I need to tell you something. I should have told you a long time ago." She paused, and I could hear the nervousness in her breathing. "For months, whenever Mr. Harper told you he was traveling for work, he brought a woman here. At first, I convinced myself she was just a colleague. But I've seen her too many times to believe that anymore. Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. "Because I wasn't completely sure," she said, her voice trembling. "And I didn't want to be responsible for destroying your marriage if I was wrong, but today feels different. His parents have never been involved before. Something about today feels important." I told her she had done the right thing and that none of this was her fault, and I meant it. Sophia had spent 13 years working for our family, and when it truly mattered, she chose to protect me instead of staying silent. The first thing I did after that was save the footage. Every camera angle, every timestamp, I exported everything into a secure folder on my laptop. Linda had told me to document everything, and some calm, unfamiliar part of me already understood why. Then the camera near the front gate captured the final piece of the puzzle. A courier van pulled into the driveway shortly after 11. A delivery driver stepped out carrying a thick envelope and walked to the front door. He waited for a signature before handing it over. And suddenly, I had a feeling that whatever was inside that envelope was about to change everything. Ryan met him outside, signed quickly, and turned the envelope over in his hands as he walked back toward the house. I zoomed in as far as the app would allow, my heart doing something slow and heavy in my chest as the words on the envelope came into focus. Petition for dissolution. He was preparing to file for divorce today. While I sat unknowing, believing him 30,000 FT above Colorado, my husband was standing in our front yard. holding the paperwork that would end our marriage on his terms in his timeline before I'd even had the chance to learn any of this was happening. Linda's office became my second home over the following days, a converted brownstone near the Arts District with tall windows and a quiet that felt deliberate. The kind of stillness built to hold other people's worst mornings. "The trust is the strange part," Linda said, spreading printouts across her desk on my second visit. Her team had already pulled records on a limited liability entity Ryan had formed 9 weeks earlier. Funneling a portion of our joint investment accounts into it under language dense enough that I would have skimmed past it entirely if I hadn't been looking for exactly this kind of thing. "By every normal read of this, you're still listed as primary beneficiary. That doesn't make sense," I said. "If he's planning to divorce me and hide assets, why would he leave me as the beneficiary of anything?" Linda leaned back, tapping her pen against the desk in the unhurried way she had of thinking out loud. "Because this isn't the final move, it's a placeholder. My guess is he's using your name as beneficiary right now, precisely so nothing looks suspicious to a bank or an auditor. And he'll change it the moment the divorce filing goes through and the accounts are legally separated. He's not hiding the theft yet, he's building the structure he'll use to commit it." I thought about the suitcase full of documents instead of clothes, the folders Diane had been sorting through the safe, and understood with a kind of cold clarity that Linda was almost certainly right. This wasn't a man reacting emotionally to a failing marriage, this was a man executing a sequence. Linda advised me to keep behaving normally, at least on the surface, while her team worked quietly behind the scenes. It was excruciating advice to follow. 2 days after the airport, Ryan called me on video and I answered, sitting at my kitchen table, doing my best to sound like a woman who believed her husband was in Denver. "How's the conference?" I asked. "Long," he said, running a hand through his hair, the hotel room behind him generic in that particular way. Beige walls, a framed print of mountains, a Denver skyline visible through what looked like a window. "I miss our bed already." I nearly laughed and covered it by asking about his sessions. His colleague's small manufactured details he answered easily enough. He was good at this, he'd clearly always been good at this, and the unsettling part wasn't his fluency in the lie. It was wondering how many other ordinary phone calls over 20 years had been built on the same quiet skill. I mentioned the call to Linda afterward almost as an aside, and she asked me to send her a screenshot of the background. Her paralegal ran it through a reverse image search within the hour. It was a stock Zoom virtual background available free downloadable by anyone titled simply Downtown Skyline Generic. "He's not in Denver," Linda said when she called me back. "That background is a stock image, and we pulled traffic camera footage near your neighborhood from yesterday afternoon. When his car passed through the intersection 2 blocks from your house at 4:17 p.m., she let that sit for a moment. Emily, he never left Dallas." I sat with the phone against my ear for a long time after we hung up, staring at nothing in particular, feeling something shift permanently in how I understood the last 2 decades of my marriage. Not just this week, not just this trip. I found myself wondering for the first time how many business trips over the years had actually just been Ryan somewhere close by hiding in plain sight, using my trust as the one piece of camouflage he never had to work very hard to maintain. The final piece of that particular puzzle came from an email Linda's investigator found buried in an old, rarely used account of Ryan's one he'd apparently forgotten. I still technically had partial access to from years earlier back when we'd shared a family calendar system for scheduling. The email was a cancellation confirmation from the airline timestamped 14 minutes after his boarding pass had scanned through security. He snorts hadn't missed his flight, he hadn't been delayed. He had walked through the security checkpoint I'd watched him disappear behind, waited long enough to be sure I was gone, and then canned the ticket and walked straight back out through an exit near the far end of the terminal. The whole airport goodbye had been theater. My last image of him boarding a plane had been engineered specifically for my benefit, a performance built around one single calculated goal, buying himself 3 uninterrupted days to move money, gather documents, and set his family's plan into motion while I sat somewhere hundreds of miles away in my imagination, believing every word he'd told me. I printed that email and set it on the growing stack of evidence Linda kept in a locked file cabinet in her office. And I remember thinking, staring at it, that I had spent 20 years believing my husband was many things, imperfect, occasionally distant, but fundamentally honest in the ways that mattered. I was beginning to understand I hadn't known him at all. The financial trail, once Linda's forensic team started pulling threads, unraveled faster than any of us expected, and further back than I'd ever have guessed on my own. Over the preceding 11 months, Ryan had sold off a significant block of shares from a joint brokerage account we'd built together since our early 30s. Money I'd always assumed was simply growing quietly in the background, the way it had for 2 decades. He'd liquidated it in 3 separate transactions, small enough that none of them individually triggered anything I might have noticed on a shared statement, and used the proceeds to purchase 2 rental properties in Frisco and a small commercial lot near the tollway. Every single one of them was titled in Diane's name, not held jointly, not structured through any entity connected to Ryan or me. Just Diane Harper listed as sole owner on paperwork filed with a county clerk's office, while I was, according to every record, hosting a client dinner for the Highland Park renovation 2 counties away. "Your father-in-law didn't know any of this," Linda said, sliding a printed asset summary across the table to me. "We pulled a deposition transcript from an unrelated property dispute Thomas was involved in last year. He didn't even know Diane had opened a new account at Frost Bank. If he was unaware of a simple checking account, there was almost no chance he knew about 11 months of real estate purchases." I thought about Thomas at Easter, as quiet as ever, passing the mashed potatoes and casually asking Ryan about the Cowboys' latest draft picks. A man who trusted his wife enough never to question how she spent her afternoons. Strangely, in the middle of my own life falling apart, I found myself feeling sorry for him. By then, I finally had her name, Natalie. Linda's investigator had uncovered it while tracing a hotel reservation, though I didn't yet realize Natalie was beginning to uncover the truth herself. Sophia mentioned it during one of our regular whispered phone calls. "She's been acting different lately," Sophia said softly. I heard her ask him why they never go anywhere together in public. Why it's always this house, always late at night, never a restaurant. Never anywhere people might recognize them. Ryan, according to what Sophia overheard, always had an excuse ready: business contacts, reputation, professional appearances. The kind of believable explanations that work perfectly on someone who truly wants to trust you, but lies eventually begin to crack. Sophia told me that the week before, Natalie had been in the kitchen while Ryan stepped away to answer a call. When he set his phone on the counter, she briefly noticed the account name displayed on the screen, a joint account with my name still attached. Natalie hadn't said anything then, but something changed after that. Sophia described it as the difference between a woman who felt at home and one who had quietly started looking for the nearest exit. 4 days later, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. "Emily," the woman asked, her voice tight with the same fear I'd been carrying myself. "This is Natalie. I think you and I need to talk. I believe we've both been lied to. We didn't meet that day. I wasn't emotionally ready, and I told her honestly. To her credit, she understood and didn't pressure me." Even in that short conversation, I learned something shocking. Ryan had told Natalie months earlier that our divorce had already been finalized, that our marriage had quietly ended the previous year, that I'd moved on with my life, and that any family gatherings we attended together were only for the sake of his elderly parents. "He told me you barely spoke anymore," Natalie said quietly. "He said it ended peacefully. He said you understood." I sat in my car outside Linda's office, holding the phone to my ear, feeling something inside me twist. It wasn't exactly anger or heartbreak, it was disbelief. Ryan hadn't simply told a few lies. He had built an entirely separate reality, detailed enough to survive months of questions, for one woman who had no reason to doubt him. "I didn't know," Natalie whispered. "I need you to believe that. I truly didn't know." I believed her. Before ending the call, she added one last detail. "He never lets the account statements come to the house when I'm there. I always thought that was normal. Now, I don't think it is." After the call, I sat in silence for several minutes. Whatever else Ryan Harper was, he was careful, methodical, controlled. Those qualities had protected his secrets for a long time, until 2 women on opposite sides of his deception finally started comparing what they knew. We met the following week at a quiet cafe in Addison, a place neither of us had ever visited before. neutral ground for a conversation neither of us had imagined having. Natalie was already there when I arrived. She stood halfway as I approached, politely offering a small smile despite everything she must have been feeling. She was several years younger than me, naturally elegant without trying. Sophia had mentioned she was an architect, and I could see it immediately in the neat, organized way she'd arranged every paper inside the folder resting on the table. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she admitted. "I almost didn't," I replied. For a few moments neither of us spoke. Two women sat across from each other, silently trying to decide whether the other was telling the truth. It didn't take me long to realize she was. Real grief leaves traces that are almost impossible to fake. Without saying much, Natalie slid the folder toward me. Inside were printed emails, screenshots of text messages, and a hotel confirmation from 8 months earlier. "I want you to see everything," she said. "I'm done hiding things." I've had enough of people hiding things from me. Together, we went through every page just as Linda and I had reviewed evidence over the previous weeks, but this felt different. It wasn't about building a legal case anymore. It was about two women finally seeing the full picture of a lie they'd each only known in pieces. Ryan had told Natalie our divorce was finalized 14 months earlier. During that same time, he had been telling me business travel was keeping him away. Two completely different stories, carefully maintained side by side. "Diane told me something once," Natalie said quietly, "about 5 months ago during dinner. She smiled and said, 'You'll be part of this family soon enough, we just need to take care of a few things first.'" She looked up at me. I honestly thought she meant wedding planning. A hollow ache settled in my chest, not for myself this time, but for Natalie. For the woman who had believed she was being welcomed into a loving family, when in reality she had simply become another part of Ryan's carefully managed deception. Positioned, kept patient while the actual machinery of Ryan's plan moved forward without her. "I'm not your enemy," she said quietly, and I told her I already understood that and meant it. Whatever anger I still carried, and there was plenty of it, none of it belonged to the woman sitting across from me, holding out evidence with hands that wouldn't quite stay still. She told me more that afternoon, small details that individually seemed insignificant, but together painted a portrait of a relationship built entirely on management. Ryan never introduced her to anyone outside his immediate family. He always paid in cash when they went anywhere public. He'd asked her twice to sign documents she didn't fully understand, framing them as routine, nothing to worry about, just business formalities tied to some property transaction. That detail, more than any other, made my pulse quicken. I called Linda that evening, and 2 days later, she confirmed what I'd already begun to suspect. One of the documents Natalie had unknowingly signed, believing it to be a standard witness signature on a business form, was actually a notarized affidavit supporting a property transfer. The same Frisco rental property Ryan had purchased under Diane's name months earlier. Natalie's signature had been used to lend legitimacy to a transaction. She had no real understanding of her trust, weaponized just as thoroughly as mine had been, only in a different direction. Worse still, Linda's forensic examiner flagged something else buried in the paperwork tied to our house. A digital signature on a preliminary transfer document dated 3 weeks earlier that was supposed to be mine. I had never seen that document. I had never signed anything electronically related to our house that entire year. "He's preparing to transfer the house," Linda told me over the phone, her voice carrying the particular steadiness she reserved for the moments that mattered most. "Probably into the same structure as the other properties. If this had gone through before you found out any of this, Emily, you could have lost your home without ever having agreed to give it up." I sat with that for a long moment after we hung up, staring at the muted television in my temporary apartment, thinking about 20 years of mortgage payments and renovations and holidays hosted within those walls. Nearly stolen out from under me with a forged signature I would never have thought to question. The final development that week came from an unlikely source. Sophia called late on a Thursday night, her voice carrying a different kind of urgency than before. Not fear this time, but something closer to disbelief. "Emily," she said, "Thomas overheard them, Diane and Ryan talking in the kitchen this afternoon. He didn't say anything to them, but he came and found me afterward. He looked like a different man." She paused. "I think he's starting to understand what his wife has actually been doing." The deposition took place in a conference room downtown. the kind with a long table and a court reporter set up quietly in the corner. Her fingers already resting over the keys before anyone had said a word worth recording. Ryan arrived looking composed, almost relaxed in a gray suit I recognized from countless client dinners over the years. He believed I could tell from the moment he sat down that this was simply about the affair, an uncomfortable but survivable conversation about infidelity. The kind of thing his lawyer had probably told him to sit through with a suitably contrite expression and let the settlement negotiations handle the rest. He had no idea how much we actually knew. Linda began methodically the way she'd built every part of this case, laying groundwork before revealing anything that mattered. She asked about the Denver trip. Ryan described the conference in convincing detail sessions he'd apparently researched well enough to discuss specific speaker names and panel topics. "And you flew back Sunday as planned?" Linda asked. "That's right." Linda slid a single sheet of paper across the table. The airline cancellation confirmation timestamped 14 minutes after his boarding pass scan. I watched something flicker behind Ryan's eyes, quick and involuntary, a man recalculating in real time. "That must be an error," he said. "We also have traffic camera footage placing your vehicle 2 blocks from your house that same afternoon." Linda continued unhurried, sliding a second document across the table. "And a Zoom call you made to your wife, from what our investigator confirmed, is a stock virtual background, not an actual hotel room in Denver." Ryan's attorney leaned toward him, whispering something I couldn't hear. Ryan's jaw tightened. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, but the confidence had thinned considerably. Linda wasn't finished. Bank records came next. The trust formation, the Frisco properties titled under Diane's name, the commercial lot near the tollway. Each document laid on the table with the same unhurried precision, building a wall between Ryan and any remaining plausible explanation. Then came the forged signature on the house transfer document, magnified on a printed comparison, beside an authentic sample of my handwriting from a notarized will we'd filed years earlier. The difference, once you knew to look for it, was obvious. Diane, seated beside her son, tried twice to interject. "This is a family matter," she said the first time. "These are simply estate planning decisions that got mischaracterized." The second time, after Linda produced Natalie's signed affidavit and explained precisely how it had been used, Diane said nothing at all, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her composure visibly costing her more effort with every passing minute. The moment that changed the entire room came when Linda played the airport security footage. It was black and white, time-stamped, unmistakable. Ryan walking through the checkpoint at 7:14 that morning. Ryan standing near a bank of seats for several minutes, checking his phone. And then at 7:26, Ryan walking calmly toward a service corridor near gate C-141, used primarily by airport staff, and exiting through a door that led back toward ground transportation. 12 minutes. That was the entire span of the lie that had launched this whole nightmare. 12 minutes between disappearing behind security and walking back out a different door, entirely never having come close to boarding a plane. I heard Thomas exhale slowly beside me. I hadn't fully realized he had joined the deposition until that exact moment. Linda had quietly invited him after Sophia called about the conversation she overheard in the kitchen. He had requested to be there himself. Since arriving, he'd barely spoken, sitting a little apart from Diane, watching everything with the careful attention of a man questioning a foundation he'd trusted his entire life. He turned to his wife. "Did you know about this?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. The house, the forged signature. Using that woman's name without her truly understanding what she was signing. "Did you know?" Diane opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer, stretching across the room like something tangible. "I was protecting this family," she finally whispered. "You were stealing from her," Thomas replied, nodding toward me. His voice remained calm, but there was no hesitation. 20 years, Diane. 20 years she's been part of this family, and you helped him do this to her." For the first time since I'd known him, Ryan had no explanation ready, no polished excuse, no charm to hide behind. He simply sat there as the evidence continued piling up, security footage, bank records, forged documents, and now his own father confronting his mother. I watched with something that felt less like victory and more like deep relief as the last bit of Ryan's control over the story slipped away. Linda closed her folder with quiet confidence. "I believe we have everything we need for trial," she said. The trial itself moved faster than I expected because there was very little left for Ryan's side to dispute. Linda presented the evidence in the same careful order she'd used during the deposition: the canceled flight, the 12-minute gap in the airport security footage, the forged signature. The trust built around properties secretly placed under Diane's name, and Natalie's sworn statement explaining how her signature had been used without her full knowledge. The judge, a woman with a calm and thoughtful manner that reminded me of Linda, spent 2 days reviewing the evidence before delivering her decision. Every fraudulent transfer was declared invalid. The Frisco properties and the commercial lot near the tollway were returned to the marital estate to be divided under standard community property laws instead of the scheme Ryan and Diane had quietly planned for nearly a year. Ryan was ordered to repay the money taken from the brokerage account with interest and to cover a significant portion of my legal expenses. The judge described his actions as a sustained and deliberate pattern of financial fraud, made even worse by exploiting another person's trust to support forged documents. Diane's involvement didn't end in that courtroom. Because her name appeared directly on the falsified property records and testimony confirmed her active role, the judge referred the case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges related to asset concealment. Whatever happened next for Diane would happen in another courtroom on another difficult day. Thomas found me in the hallway after the ruling. He was alone. By then, I understood that would likely remain permanent. He looked years older than he had only weeks before, the kind of aging that comes when a lifetime of certainty suddenly falls apart. "I spent 46 years believing I knew my wife," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Emily, for all of it. For never asking the questions I should have." I told him what I had come to believe, that some lies are carefully built so the people closest to them never notice the cracks. He nodded, shook my hand instead of hugging me, and walked away carrying the weight of a truth he had never expected to face. A few weeks later, Natalie sent me a short, thoughtful email. She had moved to Seattle after accepting a position with an architecture firm. She thanked me for believing her and for never treating her like the enemy after she handed me every piece of evidence without hesitation. I never heard from her again, and I hoped that meant she had truly found the fresh start she deserved. As for Sophia, I'd been planning something ever since the week after the deposition. Working quietly with Linda's office, I arranged everything without telling her. It was a small townhouse near her daughter's home in Oak Cliff, simple, comfortable, and completely paid off before I ever handed her the keys. When I placed them in her hand, she stared at them as if they couldn't possibly be real. "Emily, this is too much. It's not nearly enough," I answered. "You called me before anyone else that morning. You didn't have to. For 13 years, you never once chose the easy path of staying silent. I honestly don't know what these last 2 months would have looked like without you." She cried in my kitchen for a long time, and I cried with her. For the first time in weeks, those tears no longer felt like grief, they felt like healing. 3 months after the ruling, I drove to Dallas Love Field alone to pick up a friend visiting from Houston. I followed the same route I'd taken that morning with Ryan, passing the same gas station where I'd first opened the security camera app with trembling hands. As I drove, I realized I wasn't thinking about the goodbye kiss at the airport anymore, or his casual "see you Sunday," which had turned out to mean nothing. Instead, I thought about Sophia's phone call. She had chosen honesty over comfort when staying silent would have been much easier. That was the moment that truly changed everything. Looking back now, I've realized the day I believed my life had fallen apart was actually the day it finally became honest. For 20 years, I had been living inside a story someone else had written for me. Everything that came afterward, no matter how painful, no matter how long the journey, was finally my own. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know which moment affected you the most: the airport footage, Natalie's phone call, or the moment Thomas finally asked Diane the truth. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from today. We share a new story like this every single day, so if you don't want to miss the next one, be sure to subscribe and join us again.